Good afternoon. My name is Carey Newman. My traditional name, you did a pretty good job with this title, Kingiman. On my grandfather's side, I am Kwakwakiwak from the Kukwekam, Giksam, and Wawalabai clans of Fort Rupert. My grandmother was Salish from Chiama-Stalo Nation of the Upper Fraser Valley. And I'm also, through my mother, bits and parts of English, Irish, and Scottish. In other words, I am a living, breathing representation of reconciliation. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Six Nations and parts of the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Newman.Created. Gaelic Kasla, thank you for welcoming us onto your traditional homeland. Chiefs, respected elders, community leaders, all of you who are here for this event today, my family who've come to support me, my sister Marion, and Norman Owen, her other half. Gaelic Castle, thank you all for being here. I want to take a moment to thank the group of people and organizations that came together to invite us to bring the Wittness blanket to Hamilton. And I want to say to all of you that we are using the blueprint of how you've done it here to suggest to communities across the country when they contact us about bringing the blanket there. This is a community-driven tour, and the way that you did it is the right way to do it. In fact, I think it is another representation of reconciliation. And so thank you for doing it that way. Thank you for bringing us here, and I'm honored to be here. In early 2011, I heard about a request for proposals put out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for commemoration initiatives dealing with the Indian residential school era. My father was a residential school survivor, and for that reason, I was immediately drawn to that idea. Growing up, my sisters and I knew three things about his time there. We know that he doesn't like scalloped potatoes. We know that he won't eat rice pudding. And we knew that he was expelled from school for stealing the holy wine. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But aside from those anecdotes, residential school wasn't something that he spoke of. He's a gentle soul and a wonderful father. And life was simple until I turned the age that he was when he was first taken from his family. At the age of 6 or 7, his parental role models became priests and nuns, and as a result, our way of interacting changed. The close relationship that we have today was likely saved when my mother insisted that he and I go to counseling together and work out our differences. It worked, and since then, over the years, through reading books and through hearing stories of other survivors and through building this blanket, I've learned more and more about the kind of things that happen in residential schools. And knowing what happened there, and knowing what my father experienced has helped me to understand the challenges that he faced as a parent and in life. And having seen within our own extended family, my aunts and uncles and my cousins, how those challenges often result in destructive or violent behavior, has helped me to appreciate my dad on an even deeper level. My sisters and I were raised up in love with a ton of support and the kind of stability that builds children with confidence. In our formative years, we were homeschooled. And although at the time, I thought that we were doing that because my mom read a book by John Holt one time, I realize now that it was largely due to my father's experience at residential ideal childhood. We had music lessons and singing lessons, we played sports, learned how to build things, sew our own clothes, cook food for the family, and create art. I've considered myself an artist since I was probably 3 years old. My dad would go to trade shows with his work, and I would make drawings and I would sell them to raise enough money for ice cream bars. And when people asked me how much my work was, I'd say, 3 cents or 75 cents or whatever you want to use. It doesn't quite work that way now, but I'll tell you, I've got 75 cents more times than I did in the house. But having said all that, I can only imagine what life would be like if our father wasn't the strong, resilient man that he is. And if our mother wasn't the intuitive person who could see what was happening in my relationship with him and forced us to face that and to deal with it. I was also drawn to the idea of creating something by the artistic challenge that it presented. You heard a little bit about the Eagle Project, and I've carved a couple of totems that were on tour or had community involvement. And although there's a good deal of additional challenge that come along with working with the community, it's also one of those are the most rewarding experiences I've had as an artist. And so with that in mind, I started to think about what I could create, what I could do, how I could make something to honor my father, to honor residential school survivors. I knew that I wanted to make something for the whole country. I knew that I wanted to honor survivors and their families. I knew that I wanted it to be something that would be truthful, that would be earnest, that would recognize the atrocities of the residential school era. But I also wanted it to be something that would truly represent reconciliation and somehow involve community participation. It took me quite a while to come up with an idea because everyone that I had to begin with was related to the things that I know. It was a totem or a sculpture. But no matter how tall the totem was, and no matter how many fingers I figured out how to put on, it still felt really local. It really felt too regional to British Columbia, and I knew that in the end, if I did that I wouldn't connect with people from across the country. When it came to a sculpture, it was the same thing. I could maybe connect with more people, but still it has to be a figure of some sort. I have to carve it in a certain style, and it's still going to end up being more personal to me and to the people of my traditional territory than to people from different parts of the country. And it certainly wasn't going to connect with the non-Indigenous people in the way that I wanted to. So it wasn't until I came up with the idea of collection, of bringing together actual physical pieces of residential schools, that I really felt like I'd come up with something that could work. And at the beginning, I was trying to figure out if I could glue them all together and make a totem that was made from a whole bunch of pieces, right? I still was stuck in that mindset. But sitting in my living room one day, I had my feet up on this little stool that I have, and it's one of those ones where you can fold it up like that, and you put your feet on the middle part. But that stool is made from little pieces of wood that are strung together by brass rods. But I thought it was a light bulb. It was my aha moment. I realized that I could make a blanket out of these pieces. And that was what it was. I was going to build a blanket out of pieces of residential schools from across the country. And that was the very beginning of the Wittness blanket. Got ahead of myself there. For me, the blanket is the perfect symbol because of its universal meaning and use. We're wrapped in them when we were born. We wear them in ceremony. They protect us and give us comfort, and we give them as gifts to honor or uplift people. And when we are called home, many of us are wrapped in a blanket for one last time. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wanted to include objects from other places, from other sources, from government buildings, from churches, from traditional structures. And so the idea grew. Having all of the items from all of the buildings, from all across the country, would illustrate the entire story, and would illustrate all parts of the story, and truly represent reconciliation, and really involve all parts of our communities. From there, we submitted a proposal, and I came up with the idea just before the deadline, the first deadline, in 2011. And I held off. I decided that I was going to wait, and I took some time to talk it over with my family, to talk it over with elders, and to make sure that I had the right idea and that I was properly prepared to do the work in a good way. And I'm really thankful for that decision because it gave a lot of time for that idea to grow and mature and breathe. After the application was in, it was quite a while before I heard anything back, and I'd basically forgotten about it. I was going about my summer and playing with my little daughter, and I was actually at her daycare picking her up one afternoon in August when my cell phone rang, and my wife said, "I need you to find somewhere to sit down." And so the closest chair was a little tiny toddler chair. And so I was sitting on the smallest chair in the world when I found out I was going to take on the biggest project in my life. Then I started to wonder what I got myself into. At times it felt like it was an impossible task. Because how do you ask for a keepsake or a memory? Just think about the trust that a survivor would need to place in me and our team. To open up, to give us something, to share their story about something so personal that my own father wouldn't tell me his story. To help with that, I wrote this definition of truth and reconciliation, where I define truth as the collective, and I define reconciliation as whatever is in your heart. So I sort of see reconciliation as something that has many stages, and whether we are still angry, or whether we are ready to forgive, or whether we, regardless of where we are in our path to healing, reconciliation, we're in the process of reconciliation. And so that was really helpful because it gave people space to breathe and to think about the idea, and we didn't ever pressure anybody, and we made it easy for them to bring us pieces. And for the first few months, it was really about going to communities and talking about this idea. And it's easy now for me to describe the Wittness blanket. It's there, it's done. But when it's only an idea, and you're asking people to contribute something to a concept that's really difficult to describe, it takes a lot of trust. And slowly it started to happen. We met really amazing people, and they introduced us to more amazing people, and every time we got one piece, it would help us get the next. And we sort of built this critical mass, and there was a tipping point where all of a sudden, it was just like every single day there was new pieces coming in, and it was really exciting because there were times during the process of collection that I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to get everything we needed. And we got probably 75% of our pieces in the last 2 months of our collection process. And you can see how that would go, but it certainly takes its toll when you've declared that you're going to make something like this, and you've got all these pieces from people, and then if you didn't have enough, then what was I going to do, right? how would I deal with it? So I was really honored and felt so relieved when those pieces started to come in. When I started out, I thought I was going to get bricks and stone and wood and metal. But the beauty of working with community is that there's so much creativity and imagination, and different people have different perspectives. And so along with those bricks and stones that I first imagined came photographs and documents and clothing and trophies and hockey skates and buttons and braids and shoes. And I was totally overwhelmed. But I was also totally inspired. And the blanket that you see behind me is the culmination of all of those challenges that people put out to me when they gave me those pieces. And you can see the work, fitting them all together and of measuring them and making a puzzle from scratch, essentially. And I went through an entire process of experimentation where we would try to make it the way that the stool was, and it didn't work. And so we tried a new way, and that didn't work. And we eventually settled on a process with stainless steel cables, and cedar boards that are sandwiched over it, and fancy epoxy and fancy staples, and it's so much more complicated than when I described it as the bead bracelet. But it worked, and it was the only process that we found that could work. So that was just a little bit of what we went through. I mean, I literally measured every single piece and took notes on every single piece and figured out which ones I could modify and transform and which ones I was going to keep the same. And I started at that end, and I slowly worked my way across the blanket, piecing different items together and adding them to the blanket until it was finally complete. Something that I didn't anticipate was the overwhelming spiritual power of the items themselves. One in particular that caught me and permanently altered my soul was this little shoe over here. That shoe was collected from the site of a burned-down residential school in Carcross in the Yukon. When Rosie, the team member who collected it, brought it to me, she told me that when she had it in her hotel room, she woke up in the middle of the night and she felt a presence, and she felt startled, and she felt uneasy. When she brought it home, her husband had the same experience, and he didn't know the shoe was there. So she brought it to me, and the first time I held it in my hands, I wept. Because I could feel the anger and the confusion and the fear that traveled with that shoe. And I was just talking upstairs about, somebody was telling me about how the blanket reminds them of a wampum belt, and about how they record history by these belts, and each bead is a story, and how they press the memories into the beads. And I thought, that's what's happened to all these pieces. These pieces have stories pressed into them. And the shoe has a story pressed into it. And I began to talk to the shoe because that's really the only thing that I knew how to do, what to do. The only thing I could think of. And I told it this whole story about what I was playing and what the Wittness blanket was. And I was lucky because it came, one of the first few pieces that we got was that shoe. And it taught me how to honor the pieces as they came in. And it forced me to examine what I was doing and distill my idea. And it really helped. And I feel like it was sent in a way to teach me that. And that kind of thing happened many, many times throughout the course of this project. Another piece, well, two pieces that had a strong impact on me are the door and the image that's on the door. St. Michael's Residential School in Alert Bay, British Columbia. And it's the door from the boys' infirmary. And the reason that I chose this door was because of the stories I heard about what happened behind it. And I wanted to make sure, I had this idea that I could make sure that the door was never closed on that part of history. I had it and I put it on a blanket and I fixed it so that it couldn't close all the way. Now, secondary to the door was this image that I put on the back, and it's a charcoal image by an artist named George Littlechild, and he is an incredibly talented artist that lives on Vancouver Island, and he sent this image to me via email, and I was so excited to get it. And all I got with it was the title, and the title is "The Priest and His Prey." And because of the stories I've heard about what happened at St. Michael's and in this room behind this door, I decided that it would be a good place to put it, behind the door that I would never close. And it wasn't until the blanket was finished and it was already on its tour that I had a chance to go and interview George about why he chose to participate, about his experience as a second generation survivor. And he said to me, "Did I ever tell you how I was inspired to make that piece?" And I responded, "No." Well, he was at the Vancouver Truth and Reconciliation event, and he was listening to survivor testimony, and one particular story grabbed him and inspired him to make this image. And then he told me that the image was created after he listened to the story of my uncle. My uncle, Edwin, is the chief of our nation. He's the head of our family, and he's one of the most graceful and noble leaders that I know. And he attended St. Mike's Residential School. For me, that feels like something that came from another place. Again, that wasn't me making smart decisions. That was me following my heart. But my heart was being directed by another power. The last part of the blanket I want to talk about is the section that includes 2 braids of hair and a piece of apple tree. And that's over here. When I started the project, my sisters started to grow their hair. And they did it to honor my father, because one of the stories that he told at the Victoria TRC event was about when he went to school and how they shaved his head. And it's a story that's been told many times across this country. And the idea of taking a person's hair is about stripping identity, is about taking away. It's sort of this, we've all heard the statement, "take the Indian out of the child." Well, to me, the taking of our hair in a culture that only removes our hair for mourning ceremony was the very symbol of that idea. And so my sisters grew their hair for a year and a half. And when the time came, they spent 4 days in ceremony to prepare themselves. And then after their hair was cut, they spent 4 days in mourning after it was taken. And as a family, we were all touched by their bravery and commitment. And even as I knew that they were doing it for my dad, I was incredibly honored that they entrusted me with a piece of them. In the subsequent time, since they cut their hair, I've had a chance to talk to them about the impacts of how that felt. And even with consent and careful spiritual preparation. They told me how powerful that act can be, and how it altered their identity and their feeling about their femininity, and whether it was hiding behind their hair on a subway or a bus, or pulling their hair free from the collar of their jacket. It becomes a constant reminder of who you used to be. And so, if you take that and you put it in the situation of a child who didn't have the choice, and who wasn't doing it out of honor or respect, you can feel how traumatic that would be. Now, I said earlier that my dad was expelled from residential school for stealing the holy wine. And it was always my favorite story. Well, there was only 3, so. But as he told it, he and some of the other boys found a way to get into the wine cellar by crawling through a hole under the stone stairs. So they would send the smallest guy, and he would pass out the jugs of wine. They would roll them down the hill that was just beside the cellar, and late at night they would sneak out and retrieve and drink the wine under the trees in the apple orchard. Of course, they were eventually found out, and the priest lined them up and asked somebody to take responsibility. Otherwise, he would punish them all. And after waiting around for a little while, my dad stepped forward, and that was when he was told he was not to come back next year. And I've always thought about that story as a story of defiance, and a story about loyalty. And it's always made me proud to be his son. So it was a pretty incredible day when, as a family, we went to that school to walk through the grounds together. The school was St. Mary's in Mission, BC. And that day, together, my dad and I cut a piece of one of those apple trees, and that's the branch in that box by my sister's graves. And even though the buildings are gone, the foundations remain, and we found those stone stairs, and we looked through the space that they used to crawl through. And I remember that morning when we first arrived there, how my dad was really grumpy. It reminded me of when I was a little boy and had done something to upset him. Only this time, as we walked through those memories, we could see the weight slowly lifting from his shoulders. I could see him begin to reclaim that space. Everything was so much smaller than he remembered. When we stood by the gym, it was like from here to the sides. And when he was little, it was this full-sized, huge gym, and you could see how that affected him. And the more places we walked, the more stories he told, and we laughed and we cried. And it truly brought us all closer together. Now, those are just a few of the stories that make up the meaning of the blanket, and there are hundreds of more. So to preserve them, we built a mobile app that carries the history or holds the history of each piece, and I encourage you, if you have an iOS device, to go to the iTunes store and search Wittness blanket and download it. Through the process, we were also fortunate to partner with a film crew who followed us through the process and document as we were working, as we were traveling and collecting. And we're in the process of turning that footage into a documentary. Through their commitment and generosity, we were able to collect over 150 hours of footage that includes survivor testimony and residential school walkthroughs. And it's a really treasured resource. In fact, later this month, he's going to upload it to the archive at the University of Manitoba so that it's never lost. That's one of the things about this Wittness blanket is I started it out to be one thing and it continued to grow. I'm going to end my speech by reading a little bit that I wrote about why I did it, about who it's for. I made this blanket for the survivors and for the children who never came home, for the dispossessed, the displaced, and the forgotten. I made this blanket for the parents who hold their stories inside, afraid of what confronting them might cause in their hearts, afraid of how the truth will affect their children. It is for those who are angry, and those in pain, and those who are working to find their way through. For those who are bitter, and those who remember, and for those who have spent a lifetime trying to forget. To forget the braids that were shorn, the heads that were shaved, the dignity that was stolen, the beatings, the abuse and violation. I made this blanket so that I will never forget, so that we will never forget. It is for the families who have lost their aunts and uncles and sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers and children, for those who left us too soon. We have all lost someone too soon. I made this for the communities that were broken, their future scooped up and sent away, never to be the same. Silence replacing the sound of children's laughter. For the victims of violence and the perpetrators of that same violence, most of whom were never taught a better way. We cannot excuse violence, but if we can understand the root of the matter, we can begin to find solutions. It's for those like me who didn't realize how deeply we were affected until we tried to speak our traditional language or sing our traditional songs, who didn't know what we didn't know. For those who found when they had children of their own, they had to learn how to love.